Hi everyone, and welcome to TrainHR's live webinar on wage and hour compliance. It's more than just calculating overtime. My name is Liz, and I'm going to be your host today. On behalf of the TrainHR team, I would like to thank you for being part of this event. Today's webinar will be presented by Vicky Lambert. Vicky is President and Academic Director of the Payroll Advisor, a firm specialized in the training of payroll professionals. With over 30 years of hands-on experience in all phases of payroll functions, as well as over 20 years as a trainer and author, Vicky has become the most sought after and respected voice in the practice and management of payroll issues. She has conducted open market training seminars on payroll issues across the United States that have been attended by executives and professionals from some of the most prestigious firms in business today. As an adjunct faculty member at Bernardin University, Vicky is the creator of an instructor for the Practical Payroll online payroll training program, which is approved by the APA for recertification credits. We are really honored to have such a distinguished person such as Vicky Lambert with us to present this webinar. Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin, I would like to inform you of the program outlined for this training session. This webinar is for 90-minute duration. First, Vicky will take you through today's webinar, highlighting the areas that will be covered, and she would then share with you her presentation. I would also like to inform you that all participants, once part of this teleconference, have been placed on mute and will remain so until the Q&A begins towards the end of this webinar. This is for the purpose of avoiding discontinuity and for allowing the presenter to speak clearly so that everyone present can take maximum benefit from this webinar. I also request all to hold back your questions until the Q&A window begins. 10 minutes of time will be allotted for Q&A, during which your questions will be answered. And if for any reason you get logged out of this training session or teleconference, please follow the same procedure to join in again. Now that we are all ready to start, I request Vicky to take it from here. Vicky.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everybody, or good afternoon as the case may be. I'm on the West Coast, so it's a nice, beautiful summer morning and a great time to talk about wage and hour compliance. But, well, when isn't it a great time to talk about wage and hour compliance? But a lot of people think that all I have to do to comply with wage and hour laws is basically pay overtime. So I just have to say whatever the employee makes times 1.5, then I times the number of hours over 40. And that's pretty much all there is to it. And it's not. Wage and hour compliance is a very complex area of payroll. There's a lot to it. You'd be surprised how many people come up to me and say, how much can there possibly be to doing payroll? You know, which I just giggle politely and say, you wouldn't believe it. So in order to be in compliance with wage and hour law, we need to look at what are hours worked. If the employee is doing something for us or isn't doing something for us. Are we paying for that or we're not paying for it? Then we do have to look at that area of overtime, but it's a lot more than just taking whatever you make times 1.5 and paying overtime. It's a lot more complicated and always has been. Then, of course, there's the minimum wage impact. Then, of course, there's the other regulations. You see, we have regulations on the federal law, which is under the Fair Labor Standards Act, or what we call the FLSA. This was a law that was implemented in 1938 and is going on today, with roughly very few changes except increasing the minimum wage. But the states are also authorized to have their own wage and hour laws, and we have to comply with those as well. And there are 49 states that have some sort of wage and hour law. Mississippi doesn't have any. So, plus the DC area. So we look at those for when we talk about things like meals and rest periods, statements and payday notices, how often we have to pay somebody and how we have to pay them, what we have to post, and then things like direct deposit, whether or not we have to terminate an employee when we have to pay them. There are a lot of different things that wage and hour law encompasses more than just overtime. But we need to get overtime out of the way, so let's start there. What is the actual definition of overtime under the Fair Labor Standards Act, or what we're going to refer to as the FLSA? Well, it's a very simple one-sentence law. Now, if you look at the Affordable Care Act, how many pages was that? Overtime, one sentence. Should be pretty easy, right? Not really, because remember, and this is the hardest part for people to remember, when overtime law was written in 1938 by the Secretary of Labor at that time, Francis Perkins, there was no such concept as overtime. Everybody understood that if you worked 50 hours and you made 10 cents an hour, and that was basically the going rate, I would pay you 50 times 10 cents. Okay, if you worked 90 hours, I'd pay you 90 times 10 cents. But this concept of being paid extra after a certain number of hours, it was in a lot of union contracts, but it was all different under the union contract. So what she had to do was give some kind of basically average of what all those union contracts were saying. So the law she came up with is that an employee must be paid 1.5 times the regular rate of pay for all hours worked in excess of 40 hours in a work week. So when we look at that, it seems like an easy law. But remember, they had to come up with some new meanings for things like, for example, what is a work week? You know, what are hours worked? What is the regular rate of pay? So these are the things that we have to look at today in order to calculate overtime correctly. Now, the first thing that we need to realize is that on the federal level, there is no limitation on the number of employees an hour that an employee may work in a work week. As long as they're compensated fairly, they're fine. Now, we do have some different industries like trucking, okay, transportation, et cetera, that might have a little difference. But on the average, there's nothing under the Fair Labor Standards on that. But again, there may be something on the state level. So what we always have to look at is the state versus the federal. Which one do we take? We take the one that favors the employee, the higher standard. And if you want to just spell that out in easy terms, the one that gives the employee more money. Whichever rule gives the employee more money, that's the one you take. And that's the way it works. If the federal doesn't address the issue, then of course you would take the state. Now another thing that confuses people is what state? Okay, that's another thing that some people say, well, we're located in Mississippi and all of our employees, we're in all 50 states, but we, the company, headquarters are in Mississippi, so therefore we have no wage and hour laws, right? No, it's not where you are. No one cares where you are. No one. The state doesn't really care. The federal government doesn't really care. You could be in Nepal. They don't care. It's where the work is being performed. So if the work is being performed in the United States, they are covered under federal wage and hour law as long as your company meets certain standards. In other words, they have interstate commerce somehow, either with just the employee or the whole firm, and they make at least $500,000 a gross sales a year. So it's either or there. It's not both. So you may be a small company, but if you do anything interstate. And what does interstate commerce mean? It means basically you buy, sell, negotiate, talk to customers, have customers in another state and or another outside entity. So you could be in Mississippi and deal with England, and that's considered another state. It doesn't have to be another United States. Okay, so it can be anything as long as it's there. So we're going to assume you're covered under the Fair Labor Standards Act, and we're going to go on from there. So now that I know what that is, what do the state want? Well, the states do kind of differ on things. And one of those is overtime. Now remember, the state does not have to have a law. The state can have a tougher law. The state can have a law that equals it. They can say, see federal. The state can do anything they want for the citizens of their state. There's nothing here that prevents them. If they want you to pay overtime after 2 hours a day, they can force you to do it. Obviously, they wouldn't have anybody working in the state, but they could do it if they wanted to. So we have 4 states that have deemed that overtime on a daily basis is better than overtime on a weekly basis just alone. So Alaska requires overtime after 8 hours in a day. Colorado after 12. My home base now of Nevada requires that if you are not paid 1.5 times the state minimum wage, then you are going to be entitled to overtime after 8 hours. And then, of course, California, the king of overtime, and I've done 37 years of payroll in California, it's after 8 in a day. Then from 8 to 12, I'm going to be paying you time and a half. And California, as far as I know, is the only state with double time. And after 12, you'll be paying double time, 2 times the employee's regular rate of pay. And also on the 7th day, in the same work week, you begin at time and a half and you end after 8 hours at double time. So California does have a very strict one, and of course, when the employee wanders into California, you would be covered under California wage and hour law. Remember, it's up to the state to decide what workers are covered under their laws. Most of them will say if the work is performed in California, they are covered under our California law. Most of the other states will say the same thing. If the work is performed in Nebraska, it's covered under Nebraska law. If it's performed in New York, it's covered under New York law. So that's usually the way that they look at that. But the states may also have some specialty requirements. For example, Kentucky says if you work 7 days in one work week, then you got to have overtime on the 7th day. That's making you work quite a bit. And Oregon says, yeah, but it's only certain industries that we want to, because we don't want the employees to be tired and overworked when they're in certain industries such as mills, factories, or manufacturing for safety reasons. So these are all the reasons why the state may